With me now is the Shadow Finance Minister, Katy Gallagher. Thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks, David.
So the Reserve Bank Governor, Philip Lowe, says the economy's been through a soft patch over the last year, but it's actually gradually improving. Do you think he's right?
Well, we certainly hope so. I mean, it's in all of our interests that the economy improves. There has been significant negative economic data over the past, or since the election really. It's been fairly continuous, but of course we would welcome any positive news on the economy.
If he is right though, and we are seeing some growth, and he goes on to say, I think it's quite probable we'll see a return to trend growth over the next year. In that event, do we still need more stimulus now?
Well, I guess our concern has been that growth is the lowest it's been in a decade. We've got nearly 2 million people looking for jobs or are underemployed. We've got wages growth stagnant. We've got household debt the highest it's been on record. You know, and if you talk to people in the street, they're living what the economy is. They're working harder. They're not feeling like they're getting ahead. So I think our criticism of the government has been rather they've had a political plan, which they've been hammering, but they haven't really outlined an economic plan for Australia, and that's what we've been suggesting, that they look at things to, you know, support confidence and consumption in the economy, and we still think there's room for them to do that.
So, to be clear on this, you do still think stimulus is required now?
Well, I think we certainly think there are things the government could be doing that will improve confidence in the economy, i.e. that they would acknowledge, for a start, that there are problems in the economy, which, you know, I mean, they're very good at saying, oh, it's all these global economic headwinds, which we acknowledge, but they're less likely to accept that there are domestic issues here that they could have a hand in resolving.
But there are obviously some better signs than those you listed. I mean, unemployment did come down this week.
0.1%.
Yeah, and underemployment as well. There was full-time jobs growth. Wages have been growing, obviously not enough, but they have been growing. And you've got these comments of the Reserve Bank Governor that things are going to start gradually improving. Would it be a mistake to start spending more now?
Well, I mean, part of the suggestions we've had for the government are things like get an energy policy, get a wages policy, look at your infrastructure program, move it around a bit. We're not necessarily saying, in fact, we're definitely not saying spend the surplus. We're saying look at the levers you have available to you to project at least an image that you are actually acknowledging people's
But you
pain.
have been saying time to spend on New Start, bring forward tax cuts.
Review and responsibly increase New Start. We're not alone on that view. There's many people that think New Start is inadequate and needs an increase.
OK, but just to be clear, you're saying the government should be spending now or not?
We've given them some ideas, yep. We think you can responsibly invest without... We don't think it's neither or. You can responsibly invest without blowing the surplus. Now, I think they're trying to paint it as, you know, it's either we blow the surplus or we do this. We don't think it's that at all. And they have all the resources of government available to them to advise them on what the best steps would be.
Well, I was going to ask you, is this something you'll pursue in Senate estimates this week with Treasury officials? What options there are? What is being looked at? Is this something you'll be trying to go to?
Well, we won't want to outline our estimate strategy with you, David, on a Sunday morning. But, look, there's plenty of issues in estimates to pursue. I guess estimates is the opportunity for us to question public servants on government plans or what, you know, and their opinions on what's happening in the economy. It's whether the government is going to be transparent about that. They run a pretty good show at shutting down estimates and, you know, controlling information, but we'll give it a good crack.
But on this, if Treasury officials say they are also confident that the economy's now bottomed out and we are going to see improvement from here, will you accept that if it's in line with what the Reserve Bank's also saying?
Well, we'll make the decisions in the national interest based on a whole range of information, you know, and I think that's our point with the government, you know, don't be blindly pursuing a political goal, which is to beat Labor up and blame everything on Labor, but actually look at the reality of the world we're all living in Australia, acknowledge that people are finding it pretty tough, energy prices going up, childcare going up, you know, people just aren't feeling like they're getting ahead, and respond to those conditions at the time.
Those doing it toughest, arguably right now, those battling the drought. Joel Fitzgibbon's been calling for a drought cabinet. Anthony Albanese emphasising that. I think he's now written to the Prime Minister about this as well. What would that actually achieve?
Well, I think at the start you'll see this as part of Anthony Albanese's leadership is, and he said from the beginning, he wants to, where he can, work in partnership with the government. And I think this is a national emergency. It's one we all acknowledge is really hurting people in drought-affected communities, and there's the opportunity to do something different that hasn't happened a lot in the last decade in politics, and that is to work together, hand in hand around the table.
I'm not sure whether the Prime Minister will take up the suggestion, but if there were such a combined drought war cabinet style of thing, what would be Labor's one suggestion?
Well, I think, we've put out suggestions around investing in drought. I think we've been saying when they established the drought fund, actually, instead of tying it up and only giving $100 million out next year, actually invest more in communities now. And I think so spend more on the drought. Well, I think everyone acknowledges, and I hear on the tom-toms the government might be moving that way again this week in investing more in drought response. But we wouldn't necessarily come with all the solutions. I think the idea of the drought cabinet, the war-style cabinet, is that you bring people together to look at those ideas and then you reach agreement, and then there isn't the political, this isn't the right thing to do or that isn't the right thing to do, but you work together in the national interest. And I think that's a really valid way of working on these very difficult issues that sort of are over and above party politics. Just
on the drought, is it Labor's position that farm household allowance should be paid beyond 4 years to those who are still in drought?
Look, I haven't seen our comments on the drought assistance this week. I think our view is that where communities are struggling, where individual households are struggling, there has to be ongoing support. But I would refer to Joel Fitzgibbon, who's been looking at this. Look, I'm just sorry I've been tied up in the...
That's OK. Joel Fitzgibbon did say, when the government announced a lump sum payment for those who've used up their 4 years, he said this was the most callous act of bastardry, I think, since Federation. He certainly
that sounds like Joel.
It seems to be suggesting it should be paid while ever they're in drought.
I saw some of those comments from drought. Look, obviously governments need to have eligibility criteria around some of these payments, but we also have to acknowledge that this is a drought that many communities haven't experienced before, that sometimes bureaucracy has to look at how it responds, and that maybe the rules written some time ago need some flexibility.
The point is, even, and I know this isn't your portfolio, but the National Farmers Federation says there does need to be a limit. 4 years is probably it, to send a message to those on unsustainable farms that they've really got to think about it at that point, whether they need to leave.
Well, again, as I said, not in my portfolio, so I haven't had a look at it closely, but I think the issue that has been highlighted in this drought that we're experiencing now is that we have to respond to the circumstances at the time. Sure, there's eligibility requirements, but we also, I think, the community would want us to be dealing sensitively with people who are struggling. And it doesn't just go to drought, it goes to issues like New Start and other payments as well.
Let me ask you on the free trade agreements. Labor's backed during the week the 3 free trade agreements, Indonesia, Hong Kong and Peru. This is despite the concerns of unions around what are called the investor-state dispute clauses, despite the fact that they will allow more, particularly working holiday makers, into Australia. Are the unions wrong to have these concerns?
Well, I don't think it's any surprise the unions have concerns around labour impacts of free trade agreements. I guess our job as the opposition and as the parliamentary caucus has been to acknowledge those, they're real, and work with the union movement, but also accept that there are significant economic benefits that will flow from these trade agreements. So the trade agreements themselves are significantly improved, I think, in terms of improvements, modernisation of the ISDS clauses, and some of the, the visa arrangements. So we don't share the concerns to the degree that the unions do, although we acknowledge them, and we have written to Simon Birmingham and asked for clarification and agreement on a certain range of issues, which reflects some of those union concerns.
And I think he's sought to give those assurances and
we're hoping to have those, we're hoping in the next day or so to have that agreement reached. But I don't want to diminish the unions' concerns. They have long argued around, addressing worker exploitation, making sure that when workers come here that they are properly licensed, that they're skilled to do the jobs, and that also there's market testing for Australians to do those jobs before we look.
But bottom line, you do believe free trade agreements like these are of net benefit to Australia?
These free trade agreements, definitely, absolutely, and they have significant improvements in some of the clauses that the unions are concerned about. So for Indonesia, for example, if we didn't support this, the existing economic agreement would remain in place. That was in place from 1992. It has weaker protections for workers and for the dispute settlement clauses than this one. And so for us, you know, would we say no to this because it's not perfect and it's not the trade agreement that Labor would put in place if we were in government, but we're not? Would we do that and leave this one in place? And, you know, the caucus has to operate in the national interest based on a whole range of information, and that's what we've done.
Finally, the panel reviewing Labor's election defeat is meeting today. They're going to begin finalising their report. Has your thinking since the election in the last 5 or 6 months changed at all in terms of why you think Labor was unsuccessful? My individual thinking?
Look, I think I spoke to you once before about this. I think it was a range of issues. It wasn't one issue. And I'm hoping that the review, I have no doubt actually, that the review, everyone's got a view in hindsight. They will have heard all of those views, and it's their job, I think, to outline those major areas. And, you know, we look forward to receiving it.
And so it goes to policy, it goes to campaign tactics, but also Bill Shorten's unpopularity. I know this will be a sensitive thing to cover in the review and for people such as yourself to talk about, but was that a factor?
Well, look, it's a pretty brutal business, isn't it, looking in the rear vision mirror about things. Look, I mean, I make my decisions around people in politics based on my dealings with them. And with Bill, you know, I never saw anyone work harder, genuine guy, outlined a vision for Australia, and I think he would have been a good Prime Minister.
Was he a drag on the vote, though?
Look, I'll let the reviewers work that out. You know, as I said, I look at it in terms of my dealings with him. I think he would have been a really good Prime Minister. He unfortunately didn't get the chance. And part of the review will be accepting the review. You know, there are a number of people deeply affected by the election result, notwithstanding all the people that supported us in the Australian community, you know, and the millions of people that voted for us. And so part of our job now is to accept the review or look at what the review says, but most importantly, look forward and work out what to do next and hold this government to account.